Hey guys, tonight we drift into something ancient, something smoky, something that's been quietly curling through human history for thousands of years. You probably won't survive this story, not because it's dangerous, but because somewhere between the ancient fires and the hazy laughter of forgotten tribes, your eyelids might just give up the fight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment where you're listening from and what time it is there, because nothing's cozier than knowing we're all half asleep together across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by imagining darkness, the kind before history had words. A flicker of flame dances in a cave somewhere on the Asian steppe, its smoke curling against the rough stone. You can almost feel it, the warmth of fire, the scent of damp earth, and a strange, fragrant smoke rising from herbs thrown into the embers. You don't know it yet, but this is humanity's first contact with something that would follow us forever: cannabis. Before it was called marijuana, weed, or ganja, it was simply a plant, one that grew quietly in the wild, adapting to soil and wind. You picture early humans wandering across grassy plains, eyes sharp for berries and roots, their rough hands brushing against those jagged, five-pointed leaves. Maybe one night, someone tossed the plant into the fire, by accident or curiosity, and the smoke did something new. It didn't choke like burning wood. It soothed. It slowed everything down. The crackling of fire, the flicker of shadows, all seemed softer, dreamier. You can almost hear the laughter, the first lazy giggle in human history. Someone coughs, another chuckles, and for a moment the endless cold of survival doesn't feel so heavy. The tribe doesn't know what's happening, but they like it. That warmth that isn't just heat. That calm that lingers even after the fire dies. Cannabis, scientists say, was first domesticated in Central Asia, around modern-day Mongolia or southern Siberia, somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. That's older than the pyramids, older than writing, older even than the idea of civilization. It began as a practical plant. The stalks made rope, the seeds were food, and the smoke, well, that was a mystery no one could quite explain, only experience. You imagine those early people, watching the stars, wrapped in furs, feeling that slow drift between reality and imagination. Maybe they thought the plant was a gift from the spirits. Maybe it was an accident. Scholars still argue whether the first use was ritualistic or purely recreational. You smile, because really, what's the difference when you're sitting by firelight, seeing constellations dance? A quirky historical note floats into your sleepy mind. Archaeologists once found burnt cannabis seeds in wooden bowls inside 2,500-year-old tombs in western China. Whoever was buried there clearly wanted to take their smoke to the next world. That's dedication, or maybe foresight. You can't help but imagine some ancient soul lying there, arms crossed, thinking, "I'm not going anywhere without my stash." The plant traveled, of course, because humans did. You see traders trudging along paths that would one day become the Silk Road, carrying hemp fiber, woven mats, and jars of pressed oil. And maybe, hidden in a pouch or wrapped in cloth, a handful of leaves that could turn any night into something magical. Hemp became civilization's quiet companion. It helped build ships, make clothes, and bind together cultures that would otherwise have remained strangers. You take a slow breath. The more you think about it, the more you realize this isn't just a story about smoking weed. It's a story about comfort, about that universal human desire to soften the edges of reality, to take the weight off the soul for a moment. Whether it's a cup of wine, a song, or a glowing ember under a starlit sky, people have always searched for that small escape. You picture yourself sitting beside that ancient campfire now. The smoke moves lazily, glowing faintly in the flickering light. The people beside you aren't speaking your language, but you understand them perfectly. You laugh when they laugh, cough when they cough, and when the laughter dies down, you all stare into the flames together, wondering what dreams might come tonight. One man hums softly, a tone that might be prayer or just the rhythm of the night. Another leans back, eyes half closed, smiling at nothing in particular. The night stretches on. The fire pops, and somewhere between the glow and the dark, the world feels a little less lonely. You blink, realizing you've been following smoke for millennia in just a few breaths. From that first curious spark to the quiet hum of 1,000 ancient nights, it's strange how something as small as a plant can become part of the human story itself. And as your mind drifts, you start to feel that same old rhythm of firelight and calm, as if you've been here before, 100 lives ago, sitting around the same warmth, inhaling the same earthy haze, and feeling, for just a moment, that the world is perfectly, beautifully still. The night deepens, and you stumble farther into the smoke. The air feels older here, thicker, like it's been waiting thousands of years for someone to breathe it again. You crouch beside a ring of ancient stones, their edges blackened from centuries of forgotten fires. The embers glow faintly, as if remembering the hands that once built them. You can almost smell it, sweet, resinous, a little wild. Someone's been burning more than just wood here. You glance around. The cave walls flicker with light. Painted shapes, bison, antelope, strange figures with masks seem to sway in rhythm with the fire. You're watching a prehistoric cinema, drawn by hand, projected by flame. A small group of humans sits nearby, wrapped in animal skins. One of them drops another bundle of herbs into the pit. A puff of fragrant smoke curls upward, and the air changes. Eyes close, breath slow, and just like that, humanity takes another quiet step toward the dream world. You're witnessing the first moments of ritual smoke, the time when fire became not just warmth, but doorway. Archaeologists have found residues of burned psychoactive plants in ancient fire pits from Siberia to Africa, evidence that early humans didn't just fear the dark, they explored it. Scholars still argue whether those gatherings were for healing, prophecy, or maybe just a prehistoric version of Saturday Night Vibes. Whatever the purpose, one thing's clear: our ancestors were experimenting with consciousness long before they could spell it. You watch one of them now, a shaman perhaps. The others look to her for guidance. She sways, murmuring words that sound like water and thunder mixed together. The smoke clings to her hair, her fingers, her breath. When she exhales, you swear the cave paintings move. The animals on the wall begin to leap and twist, their painted hooves glowing red. For a moment, you feel dizzy, like the air itself is pulsing with memory. You realize this wasn't about getting high in the way modern people think. It was about touching something unseen. In those early fires, humans found both warmth and wonder. Fire was safety, but it was also mystery. The thin, crackling line between the world they could touch and the one they could only imagine. When they added certain plants to the flames, it was like dialing that mystery up to full brightness. You can't help but think how relatable that is. Even now, thousands of years later, people still stare into fire when they need answers, clarity, or just a moment to think. Maybe it's encoded in us, the way smoke hypnotizes, the way it blurs the edges of thought until you can finally breathe again. A strange fact drifts through your head, like a whisper through the smoke. Prehistoric humans may have learned the idea of altered states by watching animals. There are ancient accounts and modern observations of reindeer eating psychedelic mushrooms, cats rolling in catnip, elephants getting drunk on fermented fruit. Somewhere along the line, humans looked at all that and thought, well, if it works for them. It's funny, in a sleepy sort of way, how curiosity and survival have always shared a bed. You imagine an ice age night, frozen winds outside, huddled bodies inside, smoke curling from the fire pit. Someone throws in a handful of plants that smell strange but nice. Everyone leans closer. The room feels warmer. The shadows start to dance in new shapes. For the first time, maybe, someone feels connected to the stars, the ground, each other. There's something universal about that scene, isn't there? The circle, the fire, the slow rhythm of breath. The whole world reduced to light, sound, and smoke. Long before temples, long before science, people had these little laboratories of the soul. Places where they tested the edges of perception using nothing but nature and curiosity. You shift slightly, as if trying to find a more comfortable spot near the imaginary fire. The warmth seeps into your bones. The shaman hums softly now, her eyes rolled back, her fingers tracing shapes in the air. Around her, the tribe sits in silence, the kind of silence that's alive, not empty. You realize you're part of it too, just another figure in the glow, breathing the same air as they did 10,000 years ago. A tiny smile creeps onto your face when you remember a mainstream fact. Modern cannabis, the kind we know today, still carries genetic traces from those early wild plants in Central Asia, the same ones burned in those ancient pits. It's one of the oldest continuously cultivated plants in the world, used for rope, food, medicine, and yes, for moments like this, when you just want to step slightly outside yourself. There's a peculiar comfort in knowing the feeling isn't new. The gentle drift of thought, the way sound stretches, the sudden sense that maybe everything's connected. It's all been felt before. Every generation rediscovers it in their own way. The fire cracks again. Sparks jump like fireflies, rising toward the dark ceiling and vanishing. You follow one with your eyes, wondering if this is what the first humans saw when they started to believe in souls. Tiny lights escaping the fire, floating upward, refusing to die. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavy with history. You think about how fragile it all is, the knowledge, the ritual, the memories lost in smoke. Those early humans had no idea their quiet experiments would someday shape medicine, religion, and even law. To them, it was just another night, another story whispered into flame. Somewhere far off, thunder rolls, soft, ancient. The shaman opens her eyes, smiles faintly, and tosses another handful of herbs into the fire. The smoke rises, thicker this time, and for a moment you think you see shapes in it. Faces, animals, maybe even your own reflection staring back. It's peaceful here. The warmth hums through your body. You're not sure if you're awake or dreaming or somewhere in between. But you realize that's exactly where you're meant to be, right in the middle of the ancient haze, where the first humans found comfort in mystery. The world outside can wait. The smoke thickens, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely, no longer crouched in a cave, but standing in a clearing surrounded by tall brass that sways like waves under a golden sun. The air hums softly, like the world is holding its breath. You hear a drumbeat in the distance, slow, steady, hypnotic. And as you move toward it, the smell of smoke greets you again. This time it's deliberate, sacred. You're among shamans now, keepers of the unseen. Men and women wrapped in animal hides and beads of bone, their faces painted with earth and ash. They move slowly, deliberately, circling a small fire that burns with greenish flame. You notice the bundles of herbs they hold, some familiar, some not. And when they toss them into the fire, the air fills with a smell you recognize, the earthy sweetness of cannabis. The shamans believed that smoke was a bridge. It rose from the ground to the sky, carrying prayers, questions, and sometimes souls. And here, in this forgotten age, you're watching that bridge being built with every breath. The drumming gets louder, the people sway. You feel it too, your heartbeat syncing with theirs. It's strange, isn't it, how humans, separated by oceans and time, all discovered the same truth, that rhythm and smoke could open the same door. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, ancient tribes turned to cannabis to reach what they called the other side. They believed the gods didn't live in temples or clouds, but in the spaces between heartbeats, reachable only through trance. You kneel by the fire as the smoke curls upward, thinking how it's both ancient and familiar. This ritual isn't about pleasure, it's about connection. The shamans inhale deeply, their eyes rolling back as if peering inward. The smoke twists around them, glowing in the firelight, and when they exhale, the air itself seems to shimmer. Cannabis wasn't just a plant here, it was a tool for transformation. Ancient Central Asian shamans, the kind who roamed the steppes and mountains, used it to enter altered states where they claimed to speak to ancestors and spirits. In Africa, some early tribes burned hemp in ceremonies to cleanse the soul or to divine the future. There are rock paintings, thousands of years old, showing figures with swirling patterns around their heads, believed to depict visions brought on by ritual smoke. You watch one of the shamans raise their arms, chanting softly. The words mean nothing to you, yet somehow you understand them. They're not asking for miracles, they're asking for understanding, for the strength to make sense of the chaos of living. The smoke makes the edges of everything blur. You feel yourself slipping into that same rhythm, thoughts drifting like ashes on the wind. Scholars still argue whether these early ceremonies were purely spiritual or medicinal in disguise. Maybe it was both. For early humans, there was no clear line between body and spirit. Healing meant harmony, and the smoke brought that balance. Some of the earliest medical uses of cannabis, recorded thousands of years later in China and Egypt, describe it as a remedy for pain, anxiety, and the strange restlessness that visits when the mind won't quiet down. You can almost smile at that. Humanity has been fighting insomnia since before pillows existed. You blink and the world shifts again. Now you're in a yurt, a circular tent somewhere along the ancient Eurasian plains. The air is thick with incense, the walls lined with animal hides. In the center, a small brazier burns. A shaman sits cross-legged beside it, eyes closed, murmuring softly as smoke drifts around his face. Every often, he inhales deeply, then exhales through his nose in slow spirals like a snake of vapor. Around him, the villagers sit silently, waiting for messages from their ancestors. You notice the shaman's drum, painted with symbols: sun, moon, spiral, tree. Each beat seems to pull you deeper into a trance. The sound blends with your breath, the smoke, the heartbeat of the earth. You realize this is how knowledge survived back then, not through writing, but through rhythm and ritual. Memory carried in song, in story, in smoke. And even now, thousands of years later, scientists are still uncovering traces of cannabis in ancient burial sites. Ashes mixed with aromatic herbs, ceremonial vessels with sticky residues. One famous discovery in 2019 at a site called Jirzankal in western China found wooden braziers filled with burnt cannabis. The researchers said it was evidence of ritual inhalation, essentially the world's oldest hotbox. You chuckle softly at that thought. The ancient ones really were innovators. The drumming fades. The shaman opens his eyes and looks straight at you, as if he can see across time. His gaze is calm, steady, and a little amused, like he knows something you don't. Maybe he does. You feel a sudden lightness, a dizzy calm, the kind that comes just before sleep. You realize you're breathing the same air he is. His smoke, your air, one long exhale shared through centuries. You think about how strange it is that we, modern and wired and restless, still chase the same sensations they did. We meditate, we stream ambient sounds, we light candles that promise relaxation. We've traded drums for playlists, fires for vaporizers, but the desire underneath, it's the same. The longing to quiet the noise inside the mind. The shaman begins to speak again, low and steady. You don't understand the words, but they sink into you.
You close your eyes and let them. The smoke smells sweet now, almost floral. It wraps around your thoughts, slowing them down, softening the sharp edges. The sound of the drum fades into your heartbeat. The whispers of the ancestors fade into your breath. And somewhere in that stillness, you feel it, that ancient connection. Not to gods or ghosts, but to the endless, unbroken chain of human curiosity. From the first spark of fire to the latest flick of a lighter, it's all the same ritual. Our way of saying to the universe, I'm here, I'm alive, I wonder what happens if I breathe this in. The smoke begins to clear. The shaman smiles faintly, nods once, and the vision dissolves. You're left in the quiet afterglow of something sacred, an echo of ancient songs still humming faintly in your chest. The smoke thins, and when it clears, you find yourself standing on a narrow dirt road stretching endlessly east to west. It glows faintly in the desert sun, as if thousands of footprints have polished it into a ribbon of gold. The wind carries the scent of spice, cardamom, cinnamon, something sweet and smoky beneath it all. You're on the Silk Road now, humanity's first great information highway. You walk slowly, following a caravan of camels that groan under the weight of their loads. Rolls of silk, sacks of peppercorn, blocks of salt, baskets of herbs. It's a moving marketplace of ancient civilization. Traders from India, Persia, China, and Arabia walk side by side, sharing gossip, water, and occasionally a secret that smells faintly of hashish. One merchant catches your eye. His beard is dusted white from the road, his clothes a patchwork of fabrics from a dozen lands. He smiles knowingly and waves you closer. When you approach, he lifts the corner of a small woven pouch. Inside are green-brown clumps that look unremarkable, until the wind catches them and that familiar earthy aroma reaches you. Cannabis resin, carefully pressed and hidden among the spices. You realize this road doesn't just move goods, it moves ideas, beliefs, and yes, intoxicants. You trail beside the caravan for a while, feeling the crunch of sand beneath your feet. The Silk Road wasn't really one road, it was a network, a web that connected empires. Along it, hemp traveled not only as a drug, but as a resource. Its fibers became ropes, sails, parchment, and clothing. In some ways, hemp was the real backbone of early global trade. You can almost hear the merchants bargaining. 2 rolls of silk for 1 sack of rope. Throw in a little resin, and we have a deal. Somewhere near the heart of the journey, in the green valleys between mountains, you see clusters of travelers resting for the night. Fires flicker, stories rise. And in one corner, a small group shares a pipe, a primitive version carved from clay and wood. They pass it around slowly, respectfully, letting the smoke mingle with the desert air. You sit beside them. They speak different languages, Persian, Sanskrit, Chinese, but laughter needs no translation. One man gestures toward the smoke and says a single word, peace. You nod, and for a moment you feel like you've joined an invisible brotherhood stretching from the Himalayas to the Mediterranean. A soft fact drifts through your mind like desert wind. Historians found evidence that cannabis spread along these same trade routes as early as 2000 BCE. Seeds and pressed resin have been uncovered in Caravanserai, the old rest stops that dotted the path between China and the Middle East. Hemp wasn't contraband then, it was just another item on the manifest, somewhere between spices and perfume. But of course, people talked. Every culture that touched the plant gave it a new name, a new purpose. The Chinese used it for medicine and fabric, the Indians for ritual and relaxation, the Persians for poetry. In each place, the smoke changed slightly, flavored by the people who breathed it. You think of it like an ancient meme, spreading quietly, adapting to new audiences, shared not through screens, but through stories around fires. You pause at an oasis where palm trees shimmer over blue water. Merchants are resting, their camels kneeling in the sand. A storyteller performs nearby, reciting tales of travelers who lost their way and found enlightenment instead. You sit in the shade and close your eyes as the smell of smoke drifts toward you again, this time mixed with the aroma of cooking dates and sesame bread. You wonder if history ever noticed how much of it was written under the influence of trade, talk, and a touch of something calming. Scholars still argue whether cannabis shaped philosophy or just soothed tired travelers. But you can imagine it. Someone high on the plains of Persia, staring at the stars and realizing how small they are, how vast the world really is. Maybe that's how ideas of unity and spirituality began. Not in temples, but on trade routes, passed from hand to hand in little pouches of resin. You walk on as the sun sets, turning the horizon into a river of gold. The caravan continues through twilight, the bells on the camels jingling softly like a lullaby. You realize the Silk Road wasn't just about silk, it was about connection. Every puff of smoke, every shared story, every whispered trade secret was another thread in the vast tapestry of humanity. In one camp, you meet a Chinese scholar traveling west with scrolls of medicine and philosophy. He tells you that in his homeland, cannabis seeds are used to treat pain and insomnia. In the next camp, an Indian monk describes bhang, a sacred drink made from the same plant, blended with milk and spices. A few nights later, a Persian poet recites verses about a mysterious herb that frees the heart from fear. The words linger in your mind long after the fire dies. The road hums with all these voices, merchants, mystics, wanderers, all bound by trade and curiosity. You start to see the plant itself as a traveler, a quiet passenger hidden in saddlebags and song. Wherever it went, it changed people just a little, softened tempers, inspired art, made the unbearable distances between cultures feel smaller. A random but fascinating detail drifts in. Some traders believed the scent of hemp smoke could ward off evil spirits. Others swore it brought luck to caravans. Whether it was superstition or side effect, who can say? You smile, imagining a nervous merchant lighting up before crossing a desert, hoping the smoke might calm the gods, or at least himself. By the time you reach the western edge of the Silk Road, the stars are out. You stop on a ridge and look back at the path, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Behind you stretches thousands of miles of exchange, goods, ideas, and smoke all mingling together like one long exhale from humanity's lungs. The wind shifts. You inhale deeply, catching that same ancient scent that began in a cave and traveled across continents. You exhale, feeling connected to every tired traveler who ever found comfort in the same small cloud. And for a moment, you realize, maybe history is just smoke, rising and fading, but always finding a new sky.
You linger by the Ganges as sadhus sip bhang, cannabis in milk, while chanting to Shiva, the original chill god. The air along the ghats of Varanasi hangs thick with the perfume of incense and the hum of eternity. Bells chime from temple spires, echoing across the slow, shimmering waters of the Ganges. Smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of sandalwood, ash, and something else, something more ancient, more intoxicating. In the shadows of stone shrines and flickering diyas, saffron-robed men sit cross-legged, eyes half-closed, their minds swimming somewhere between heaven and earth. These are the sadhus, the wandering ascetics of India, and in their ritual bowls, a pale green liquid swirls, bhang, the sacred drink of Shiva. To the untrained eye, it might look like just another concoction of herbs and milk. But to the devout, bhang is no mere drink. It's an offering, a portal, a form of communion. Its preparation is ceremonial. Fresh cannabis leaves are ground with mortar and pestle, mixed with milk, almonds, and a hint of sugar, then poured into clay cups. Every sip is an invocation. As the Ganges glows gold beneath the sunrise, the sadhus chant Shiva's name, their words dissolving into the smoke rising from their chillums. They call him Mahadeva, the great god,
The ascetic lord who dwells on Mount Kailash, draped in tiger skin, his body dusted in ash, a crescent moon perched above his dreadlocked hair. And always, in his hand, the chillum burns. For the sadhus, cannabis isn't a vice. It's a divine bridge, a way to align their spirit with Shiva's infinite calm. It's said that after drinking bhang or smoking the sacred herb, they can feel the god's presence enter their bodies, loosening the knots of ego and opening the mind to cosmic truth. This connection between cannabis and the divine runs deep in Indian mythology. According to ancient Hindu texts, when the gods and demons churned the cosmic ocean, the Samudra Manthan, a poison emerged that threatened to destroy the universe. To save creation, Shiva drank the venom, turning his throat blue. But as the heat of the poison burned him from within, he sought relief under a cooling plant, the cannabis. Grateful, he blessed it as sacred. From that day, the plant became a gift from the divine, a tool to quiet pain, purify thought, and transcend the illusions of the world. The Atharva Veda, one of the oldest Hindu scriptures, mentions cannabis among 5 sacred plants, describing it as a source of happiness, liberation, and compassion. To the ancients, it was not a substance of escape, but of enlightenment, a means to still the restless mind. The Sanskrit name for cannabis, Vijaya, means victory, symbolizing triumph over fear and ignorance. Even today, during festivals like Holi and Mahashivratri, millions across India drink bhang as a sacred offering, invoking Shiva's blessing in the swirl of color and chant. But it's here, in the dusty ghats and mountain caves, that the ritual retains its purest form. The sadhus see themselves as living embodiments of Shiva's detachment. They renounce family, wealth, and worldly pleasure, carrying little more than a trident, a begging bowl, and a chillum. As they inhale the thick smoke, they don't seek intoxication, they seek dissolution. Bole nath ke naam par bole banjao, they say. In the name of the innocent Lord, become innocent yourself. Each puff of sacred smoke is an act of surrender. Each drop of bhang, a baptism into stillness. You can almost feel it in the air, the rhythmic hum of mantras, the clinking of rudraksha beads, the sound of the river lapping against the steps. A sadhu opens his eyes and smiles faintly, as if he's seen the edge of eternity and found it peaceful. His gaze isn't on the world, it's beyond it. But cannabis in India was never confined to the spiritual alone. Long before colonial laws and modern taboos, it was woven into everyday life, used in Ayurvedic medicine to ease pain, anxiety, and sleeplessness. Farmers chewed the leaves for stamina during long days under the sun. Poets praised its ability to dissolve the walls of the mind and invite the muse within. Kings and mendicants alike found solace in its gentle fog. Ancient healers saw it as a balancing force, a plant that could harmonize the body's energies when used with discipline. Texts like the Sushruta Samhita and Charaka Samhita, foundational works of Ayurveda, describe it as an analgesic, a digestive, and a spiritual enhancer when consumed ritually. It was medicine, meditation, and mystery all in one. Yet, as the centuries passed and foreign powers arrived, the sacred status of cannabis began to fracture. The British, bewildered by the sight of sadhus joyfully smoking their pipes by the Ganges, viewed the practice with suspicion. To them, intoxication meant vice, not virtue. Reports were written, laws debated. Colonial officers puzzled over how to control a plant that was both holy and habit-forming. In 1894, after years of study, the British Indian Hemp Drugs Commission reluctantly admitted that moderate use of cannabis among Indians caused practically no physical injury of any kind. But the damage was already done. Western morality had cast its shadow. Still, the plant endured, quietly surviving in temples, in rituals, and in songs whispered during festival nights. On Mahashivratri, even today, devotees gather to honor Shiva by sharing bhang. They dance, they sing, they laugh, their minds dissolving into the same sacred calm their ancestors once knew. The moment feels timeless, as if the ancient fire pits of prehistory have found their echo in the clay chillums of modern Varanasi. You sit among them, the sound of the river pulsing like a heartbeat. Around you, the smoke drifts upward in soft spirals, vanishing into the pink dawn. A sadhu passes you a cup of bhang, his eyes twinkling with centuries of unbroken faith. You sip, cautiously. The taste is grassy, earthy, strangely soothing. The chants swell, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Something in the air changes. The sound of bells seems to stretch, each note shimmering. The river glows brighter, the world slows down, and you feel not high, but still, perfectly, deeply still. Maybe this is what the ancients meant, not intoxication, but illumination, a pause between breaths, a silence inside the noise. And somewhere, in that quiet, you understand why Shiva smiled when he blessed the green leaf. Because even the gods knew, sometimes peace comes not from escaping the world, but from inhaling it, one sacred breath at a time.
Peek inside tombs where traces of cannabis appear, hinting that pharaohs might have taken their stash to the afterlife. The torchlight flickers across the painted walls of a tomb, throwing long, restless shadows over the gods of Egypt. Anubis with his jackal's head, Osiris wrapped in green resurrection, Isis spreading her wings over the dead. The air smells of dust, ancient oils, and something faintly resinous, like old smoke trapped for millennia. In the quiet, you feel as if time itself is holding its breath. And then you see it. Nestled among jars of honey, perfumes, and linen wrappings are fragments of a dried plant, cannabis. For years, Egyptologists dismissed these traces as coincidence, maybe weeds carried by the wind or the contamination of later centuries. But modern analysis has confirmed what the ancients may have known in secret. Cannabis was present in the land of the pharaohs. And not just as a wild weed, but as something used, revered, and possibly smoked. To understand why, you have to think like an Egyptian, not just about death, but about eternity. To the ancient Egyptians, life was only a brief rehearsal for the afterlife. The body was a vessel, the spirit a spark. When the heart stopped beating, the real journey began. A voyage through underworld rivers, across fields of reeds, past gods who weighed your soul on golden scales. And for such a cosmic passage, one did not travel empty-handed. The tombs were stocked like cosmic suitcases. Jars of beer, loaves of bread, gold ornaments, kohl for the eyes, perfumes to please the gods. And tucked amid these treasures, small traces of plants. Lotus, mandrake, blue water lily, and yes, cannabis. Whether ground into ointments, steeped in oils, or burned in censers, these herbs were thought to bridge the world of the living and the divine. In temple rituals, priests often burned sacred mixtures of incense known as kaifi, a recipe combining honey, raisins, wine, and mysterious herbs that released a heady, hypnotic smoke. Some historians believe cannabis may have been one of these ingredients, its fumes carrying prayers skyward. Imagine the grand temple of Karnak, torches flickering against hieroglyphic pillars, priests in white linen swinging bronze censers, the air shimmering with fragrant smoke. Each breath would have been a step closer to the gods. Ancient papyri hinted even deeper uses. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts known to humanity, around 1550 BCE, lists remedies involving shemshemet, a term many scholars interpret as cannabis. It was prescribed for inflammation, eye pain, and even as an aid to childbirth. The ancient healers saw it as both balm and blessing, able to soothe pain and quiet the spirit.
One passage reads like something from an ancient pharmacy. Ground shemshemet in honey, apply to cool the womb. Another, to drive away sorrow, the leaves are to be burned. These weren't mere recreational moments, they were moments of healing, of divine medicine. To the Egyptians, illness was not simply physical, but spiritual, a sign that the body's harmony with Ma'at, the cosmic order, had faltered. Cannabis, in its smoky stillness, might have been one way to restore that balance. But what's most fascinating is that traces of cannabis have been discovered in royal tombs, including that of Ramses II, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. His mummy, preserved for over 3,000 years, revealed particles of cannabis pollen woven into his wrappings. Was it used as perfume, as medicine, or was it something deeper, something spiritual? Imagine Ramses II, the man who built temples that scraped the horizon, lying still, as priests anointed his body with oils infused with sacred herbs. The scent rising in the chamber would not have been unlike that of a chillem's first puff, earthy, sweet, otherworldly. The priests might have believed that this sacred aroma would guide his Ka, his vital spirit, through the dark corridors of the underworld toward the eternal light of Osiris. Cannabis may have been a passport to paradise. In the Egyptian imagination, the afterlife wasn't a vague heaven. It was a vivid continuation of earthly pleasures, perfected and eternal. You would eat, drink, work, make love, and rest under the cool shade of papyrus trees. Every sense mattered. Perfume for the gods, wine for celebration, music for joy, and perhaps a sacred smoke to ease the transition. Even the Book of the Dead, Egypt's guidebook for immortality, speaks in tones that echo the psychedelic. I have opened my mind to the light. I have drunk from the well of stars. Such language hints at ritual experiences, altered states where the boundaries between self and cosmos dissolve. Could the priests, or even the pharaoh himself, have sought those states through cannabis? It's not impossible. In temple art, you often see lotuses, symbol of rebirth, held near the nose, inhaled as if in rapture. The blue lotus itself was mildly psychoactive, inducing calm and euphoria. Combined with other herbs, perhaps cannabis, it may have created a bridge between flesh and divinity. These weren't the highs of pleasure seekers, but of pilgrims seeking to merge with eternity. It's worth remembering that ancient Egypt's medicine and magic were inseparable. To heal the body, you invoked the gods. To reach the gods, you purified the body. Cannabis, soothing and sacred, fit perfectly into both worlds. It was a plant of thresholds, between pain and relief, between life and death. And then came the tombs, the final sanctuaries. When you look at the painted walls of these resting places, you see not sorrow, but serenity. The dead dining with gods, rowing boats under eternal sunlight, surrounded by the scents of incense and flowers. The Egyptians didn't fear death, they prepared for it. They filled it with beauty. And in that beauty, cannabis played its subtle, smoky role. Picture a high priest in Thebes, tending to the embalming of a noble, the air heavy with natron and myrrh. He whispers a prayer to Anubis, god of mummification, then lights a brazier. The scent rises, sharp, spicy, familiar. He closes his eyes, breathing in, feeling the veil thin. The dead, he believes, are listening. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists break the seal on that same tomb, the air still holds a ghost of that ritual fragrance. For a moment, you breathe the same air as the ancients. The connection is intimate, timeless. And maybe that's the point. Cannabis wasn't just about pleasure or pain relief. It was about continuity between body and soul, earth and sky, life and the afterlife. A plant that could soothe the living and guide the dead. As you step back from the tomb wall, the hieroglyphics seem to shimmer in your torchlight. Serpents coiling, eyes watching, gods smiling faintly. Somewhere in the dark, incense still burns. You can almost hear the whisper of the Nile outside, eternal and unbroken. And for a fleeting second, you understand what the pharaohs might have felt when they packed their green treasure for the journey beyond. That to face the unknown, one must carry not just gold or glory, but peace of mind.
You eavesdrop on ancient thinkers arguing about pleasure, virtue, and whether smoke can elevate the soul, literally. You find yourself on a breezy hillside overlooking the Aegean Sea. The marble columns of Athens glint in the afternoon sun, and the hum of debate drifts through olive groves. It's not the sound of war or politics this time. It's the quieter battle of ideas. Somewhere below, in the shade of a stone courtyard, a few bearded men are arguing about whether pleasure is noble or a trap for fools. And the air around them? Let's just say it smells philosophical. You slip closer, sandals crunching on gravel, and recognize the setting. A symposium, a kind of ancient think tank mixed with a dinner party. Cushions, wine, fruit, and, curiously, a small brazier giving off slow, fragrant smoke. You watch as one man, his robe loosely draped, gestures with a clay cup and proclaims, "Pleasure is divine. How else would the gods lure us toward happiness?" Another frowns, swirling his wine like he's trying to find logic at the bottom of it. Pleasure, he counters, is a chain that binds the soul to the body. A philosopher must rise above it. And there it is, the eternal Greek contradiction. Body versus mind, desire versus discipline. Even here, in the birthplace of reason, people can't resist asking whether a little smoke might actually bring them closer to enlightenment, or just make them forget what they were debating in the first place. While most people know the Greeks for their philosophy, their temples, and their democracy, fewer realize how open they were to exploring altered consciousness. The ancient world was full of sacred substances, plants, wines, vapors, that were used not just for recreation, but for revelation. The most famous example? The Oracle of Delphi. High on Mount Parnassus, a priestess known as the Pythia sat above a fissure that released sweet-smelling gases, likely ethylene or possibly burning herbs. Visitors, from generals to kings, would travel hundreds of miles just to ask her a question. She would inhale the vapors, enter a trance, and speak in riddles. The Greeks believed the god Apollo spoke through her. Scholars still argue whether those visions were divine or just the world's most sacred contact high. Now, cannabis wasn't exactly as common in Greece as in India or Scythia, but it was definitely known. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, gives us one of the earliest descriptions of cannabis use in the ancient world. He writes about the Scythians, the nomadic warriors of the steppe, who would throw hemp seeds onto hot stones in their tents, filling the space with thick, aromatic vapor. They howl in joy, Herodotus says, and no Greek bath could compare. It's one of those rare historical passages where you can almost hear the laughter echoing across centuries. Of course, being Greeks, they didn't just observe, they debated it. You can imagine a young philosopher, perhaps a student of Democritus, the man who claimed the universe was made of tiny invisible particles, wondering aloud whether smoke could lift not just the senses, but the soul. If all things were atoms, then perhaps the mind, too, could be changed by inhaling the right kind. In another corner of the symposium, a serious-looking man with sharp eyes, maybe Plato himself, leans forward. The highest pleasure, he says softly, is not of the body, but of the intellect. He gestures toward the drifting smoke as if addressing it directly. But if this, he waves his hand through the cloud, helps one glimpse the truth beyond form, then perhaps it is not vice, but vessel. Cue a chorus of agreement and eye rolls. Someone jokes, "So, the Republic of Smoke, then?" The laughter echoes like warm wind through the columns. But it's not all jokes. There's genuine curiosity. The Greeks, after all, were obsessed with balance. Excess was dangerous, but experience was divine. Even Aristotle, in his famous Golden Mean, insisted that virtue lived in moderation, not in denial. So while he might have raised an eyebrow at smoke-fueled insights, he probably wouldn't have condemned them outright. You notice something interesting. While the philosophers debate abstraction, the common people outside the symposium live the question in simpler ways. In markets and festivals, they burn herbs, rosemary, myrrh, and yes, occasionally hemp, to bless homes, soothe aches, or sweeten the air. Farmers rub cannabis oil on wounds. Midwives use it to ease childbirth pains. To them, it's not about enlightenment, it's about comfort. Still, the idea of smoke as bridge persists. The Greeks believed that fire and air were sacred elements, connecting mortals and gods. Burning herbs wasn't just fragrance, it was prayer turned physical, breath given shape. You inhale and the gods exhale, a cosmic exchange. You watch one philosopher, older, serene, his beard silvered like moonlight, sit silently as the debate buzzes around him. Finally he speaks. If smoke rises and the soul rises, he says, perhaps they are made of the same thing. The room goes quiet. Even the brazier seems to pause. You can't help but smile. That line could have been written on a modern poster next to a lava lamp. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Archaeologists have indeed found hemp seeds in ancient Greek sites, especially near the Black Sea colonies. They were likely imported from Scythian lands, used both for rope and recreation. The Greeks, ever curious, experimented. They made ointments with hemp oil, wove hemp into sails, and occasionally, when the mood struck, burned it at gatherings like this one. But the real high of Greek culture was thought itself, the intoxicating act of asking questions with no final answers. And in a way, that's not so different from what happens when someone sits under a cloud of fragrant smoke and starts wondering why the stars look like tiny fires, or whether the soul has weight. You notice one of the younger philosophers staring dreamily into the horizon, his cup half full, his eyes soft. Maybe, he says, smoke doesn't cloud the mind. It reveals how cloudy it already was. The others chuckle, but no one disagrees. The discussion shifts to the gods, Dionysus, patron of ecstasy and altered states. His followers believed that to truly worship him, you had to let go, shed the armor of reason, dance barefoot, lose yourself in frenzy. Through that surrender came clarity. It sounds chaotic, but in the Greek worldview, even madness had meaning. And so the smoke drifts up again, curling lazily toward the stars that will soon rise above Athens. You watch it fade into the pink sky and think about how human it all is, the endless tug between thought and feeling, between control and surrender. The philosophers begin packing up, still arguing good-naturedly. One claims the gods would never approve of such indulgence. Another retorts, then why give us herbs that make us laugh? The elder with the silver beard smiles faintly. Perhaps, he murmurs, laughter is the first step toward wisdom. As twilight deepens, you walk away from the courtyard, past the olive trees humming with cicadas. The air still carries that faint sweet scent. You can almost hear Socrates chuckling somewhere, saying that the unexamined smoke is not worth inhaling. You take a slow breath and look up at the gathering stars. Maybe enlightenment isn't about escaping the body after all. Maybe it's about understanding the strange, fragile joy of being human, curious, flawed, forever reaching for the divine through a haze of our own making. And as the last curl of smoke disappears into the night, you realize something quietly profound. Even when they sought reason above all, the Greeks never stopped worshiping mystery. You wander through medieval Baghdad, where scholars and mystics share hashish under starry skies, inventing stories like the Arabian Nights. The sound of the desert night is soft, sand shifting, a lute somewhere in the distance, the murmur of laughter beneath hanging lamps. You walk through a narrow alley of medieval Baghdad, and the air feels heavy with stories. Every window glows gold, every courtyard hums with voices. It's the 9th century, the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, the world's brightest city of ideas. And tonight, the city smells faintly of honey, spice, and something more intoxicating: hashish. You pause by a low-arched doorway where music spills out. Inside, men in silk robes recline on cushions, their eyes half-lidded, their smiles slow and unhurried. A copper brazier glows in the corner, the smoke curling lazily toward the star-painted ceiling. They pass around small ornate pipes, each puff followed by a soft exhale and a sudden laugh. The conversation drifts from philosophy to poetry, from the stars to love, and back again, as if all the boundaries between those things have melted in the air. You're standing in one of Baghdad's mejlis, the night salons where poets, mystics, and scholars met to exchange ideas. Hashish wasn't just a vice here, it was a muse. Under its influence, words loosened, imaginations expanded, and the rigid walls of logic softened into poetry. In these smoky rooms, entire worlds were born, the worlds that would later fill 1001 Nights, the great treasury of Arabian tales. You listen as a young man, eyes shimmering, voice like velvet, begins to tell a story. There was once a fisherman, he says, who opened a brass bottle and found a genie inside. The others lean closer, smiling. Someone adds a verse, another twists the ending. The story morphs, evolves, becomes something new. You realize you're watching oral storytelling at its finest, a communal dream spun from smoke and words. It's easy to forget that medieval Baghdad was the intellectual heartbeat of the world. The House of Wisdom, only a few streets away, housed scholars translating the knowledge of Greece, Persia, and India into Arabic, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. And yet, even in those circles of reason, the mystical currents of Sufism were flowing strong. The mystics believed that through meditation, poetry, and sometimes even altered states, the soul could touch the divine. Hashish, made from the resin of cannabis, became one of their tools, not to escape reality, but to see through it. Sufi poets wrote of the green essence that lifts the veil. They described it as a doorway to the presence of God, a way to quiet the noise of the mind and hear the music beneath creation. One mystic wrote, "When I inhale, I vanish. When I exhale, he remains." Scholars still argue whether those lines were metaphor or method, but the intent was clear. For some, hashish was not indulgence, it was illumination. You drift deeper into the courtyard. A storyteller waves you over, handing you a cup of thick, sweet coffee. He grins, his teeth bright in the lamplight. "Sit, traveler," he says. "The night is long and the stars are generous." He sprinkles a pinch of something dark and green into the brazier, and the scent sharpens, sweet, smoky, earthy. Around you, conversation becomes music. Words slow down, but meanings grow wider. A scholar quotes Aristotle, a musician counters with a verse from the Quran, a mystic answers with laughter. Everyone's right, and no one's certain. The night is too beautiful for certainty. A mainstream historical fact surfaces through the haze. By the 12th century, hashish use had spread from Persia through the Islamic world. While alcohol was forbidden by religious law, hashish occupied a strange gray zone. Technically not wine, yet undeniably intoxicating. Some jurists condemned it as sinful, others tolerated it as medicine. And still it flourished in the cafes, palaces, and gardens of Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad. There's an old tale from this era, the story of Sheikh Haidar, a wandering Sufi who, legend says, discovered hashish after observing goats munching on wild hemp and dancing joyfully under the sun. Curious, he tried it himself, and felt his soul lifted to the heavens. He introduced it to his disciples, who used it to reach ecstatic states during chanting and prayer. The sect became known as the Haidariya, and their green robes and dreamy eyes earned them a curious mix of reverence and ridicule. The courtyard you're in might as well be one of their gatherings.
Someone starts reciting a chazal, soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby. The smoke curls upward like the soul's memory, and God hides behind its spiral grace. The others sigh in appreciation. One man, older and clearly very relaxed, mutters, "Perhaps paradise smells like this." You can't help but smile. There's a sense of peace here that feels almost modern, like a hookah lounge mixed with a philosophy class. Everyone is equal under the smoke, the prince, the poet, the beggar. Ideas, like hashish, are meant to be shared. And yet, not everyone approved. Religious authorities in later centuries called it haram, unclean. They claimed it dulled the mind and distracted the faithful from prayer. But the mystics countered with a sly grin. How can the mind be dull when it is full of God? Somewhere in the distance you hear the faint trickle of a fountain. The stars above Baghdad shimmer like grains of salt on black silk. You realize that this, the late-night conversations, the shared smoke, the endless stories, isn't just history. It's the same human urge that drives people today to sit around campfires, light candles, or watch smoke curl from incense. It's not about the substance, it's about slowing down time long enough to feel wonder again. As the night deepens, someone brings up the philosopher Avicenna, known in Arabic as Ibn Sina, whose medical writings mention the use of hemp for pain, digestion, and melancholy. He was one of the few to study it without moral panic. To him, the plant was simply another tool in the vast pharmacy of nature. In that sense, the scholars and the mystics weren't so far apart. They both believed that the universe hid medicine in its mysteries. Another man, with laughter in his eyes, adds, "Perhaps stories are the stronger drug." And he might be right. For centuries after, the tales born in these smoky gatherings of thieves, sultans, lovers, and genies would travel west along trade routes, changing shape, language, and rhythm, until they became the Arabian Nights. Even Scheherazade herself, telling tales to delay her death, feels like a spirit of this very courtyard. A woman spinning survival and magic out of midnight air. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The lute keeps playing. The storyteller begins another tale, something about a sailor named Sinbad who finds islands shaped like whales. The smoke swirls and shimmers. The line between myth and memory dissolves. Maybe that's the real secret of hashish in these nights. It wasn't about escape. It was about entering the story more deeply, stepping into the shimmering dream between worlds, where wisdom hides behind laughter and the stars are listening. You exhale slowly. The scent lingers on your skin, sweet and timeless. The storyteller looks at you and winks. "Careful," he says. "Once you taste the smoke of stories, you never quite return to silence." And as the stars burn brighter over Baghdad, you realize he's right. You drift into medieval Europe, where cannabis arrives as rope, medicine, and mystery, then quietly vanishes into superstition. You step off a creaking wooden bridge and find yourself in a foggy, cobbled town somewhere in 13th century Europe. The river mist clings to your cloak, and the scent of wood smoke from hearths drifts lazily into the air. Around you, merchants hawk hemp ropes, bundles of linen, and jars of herbal remedies. You notice the oddity. Everyone seems to treat the plant with polite suspicion. Here, cannabis has arrived, not in grand ceremonies, nor in the sanctified chillums of Baghdad, but as a practical domestic commodity. Yet whispers of its more unusual properties float in the air like smoke. Cannabis reaches Europe mainly through two paths: from the Islamic world via Spain and southern Italy, and through trade with the distant lands of Asia. By the 12th and 13th centuries, hemp is essential. Sailors need ropes and sails. Farmers need fibers for clothes. Alchemists and apothecaries need the seeds and oils for medicinal experiments. Yet its psychoactive properties, known in the East for centuries, are largely misunderstood here. You wander into a small apothecary. Inside, shelves are stacked with jars labeled in Latin: cannabis sativa, hellebore, mandragora. A wizened man with a crooked nose and spectacles peers at you. "Leaves for poultice," he says, gesturing at the dried green bunches. "Seeds for oils and liniments.
But smoke? Caution. Strange visions have been reported. Indeed, reports of strange visions are sporadic but persistent. Travelers returning from Moorish Spain speak of people using hemp smoke for divination, revelry, or what they call magical flights. To the medieval European mind, anything unusual is suspicious, and anything that alters consciousness risks being linked to heresy. Scholars still argue whether these reports were exaggeration or early criminalization attempts. Some believed that inhaling the smoke could lead to madness, others to sin. In monasteries, you see another layer of confusion. Monks grow hemp for rope, for sails, for paper, for oil. But when it comes to smoke, they are silent or fearful. A novice whispers that old women in villages sometimes used a tincture of hemp for insomnia or pain. A gift from God, he murmurs, or the devil if the stories are true. It's hard to tell which is which in these centuries. And then there's the folklore. Everywhere you look, cannabis becomes a shadowy figure in European superstition. In some regions, witches are said to fly on broomsticks anointed with hemp oil. In Germany, peasants whisper that hemp smoke can cloud the soul or invite spirits. It's easy to see why the church was wary. A plant that heals, intoxicates, and confuses is a perfect candidate for suspicion. You can almost hear the faint echoes of trials, interrogations, and midnight burnings lurking just beyond the edges of the village. Yet, amidst the fear, cannabis quietly thrives in practical life. Rope making is booming, fiber is prized for sails that carry ships across northern seas. Farmers praise hemp for its resilience, and apothecaries study its oils and seeds as remedies. Seeds, when pressed into oil, are used to soothe joint pain and inflammation. Leaves are included in ointments. Even some medieval recipes for wine or beer mention small amounts of hemp to aid digestion or induce mild relaxation. It's everywhere, and yet nowhere, a domestic hero cloaked in mystery. You walk past a market square where children play around a fountain shaped like a lion. In the background, a traveling alchemist sets up shop. He claims he can turn hemp into tinctures for sleep, anxiety, or fevers. Crowds gather, murmuring about the magic of the plant. You lean in and see it, a jar of resin mixed with honey, promising relief and delight. In the air, the scent is faint but unmistakable, earthy, pungent, subtly sweet. You realize Europe has inherited the plant, but not the ritual wisdom. Cannabis has become a utilitarian tool, stripped of its sacred heritage, yet hints of its psychoactive legacy remain in stories and whispers. And it's confusing, because while medicine sees the plant as practical, folklore frames it as dangerous. A peasant might rub hemp oil on a sore knee, then look nervously at the sky, wondering if spirits are watching. A monk might grind the seeds for an ointment, secretly recalling tales of wandering Eastern mystics and their smoke-filled visions. A noblewoman might sip a wine infused with hemp seeds, feeling oddly relaxed, then discreetly pass the secret along to her closest confidants. Interestingly, cannabis's duality, practical and mystical, makes it a topic for academic curiosity even in the Middle Ages. Some alchemists write obscure notes. Hemp calms the humors, yet opens the mind to visions, hinting at an understanding that modern scholars still debate. Others, influenced by moral codes, recommend strict limitation or avoidance. It's as if Europe cannot decide whether the plant belongs to the body, the mind, or the realm of sin. You wander into a forest outside the town. The mist rolls over the hills, and the sound of a distant stream mingles with the hoot of an owl. Locals call the area enchanted, warning that strange herbs grow here, tempting young men and women. You see hemp sprouting quietly in the underbrush, overlooked yet resilient. Its leaves catch droplets of dew, glimmering like emeralds in the pale sunlight. It's a reminder that no matter superstition, fear, or law, the plant endures. A mainstream historical fact nudges your thoughts. While cannabis fiber was vital to medieval Europe, its intoxicating properties were largely forgotten or suppressed until the Renaissance, when travelers and scholars revisited ancient texts. For centuries, it existed in a gray zone, an essential material for civilization, but a mysterious substance whose smoke was feared more than understood. You pause by an abbey gate, watching the monks tend their gardens. They cultivate hemp with care, harvest seeds, and press oils.
Yet in the library, books contain vague warnings. Beware the smoke of foreign lands. It confuses the mind and tempts the soul. You think about how human fear and ignorance can obscure even something beneficial. The plant is here, doing good quietly, while stories inflate its dangers into legend. As night falls, torches flicker across the town. Smoke from hearths and ovens drifts lazily into the dark sky. Somewhere, an old herbalist mutters about a secret recipe. Another whispers about visions in the forest. You realize Europe has inherited a plant full of promise, but surrounded by superstition, selective memory. And in that quiet, drifting mist, you understand the paradox. Cannabis, essential and practical, sacred and feared, is Europe's smoky enigma, a friend, a foe, and a whispering ghost of stories yet to come.
You pass through the 17th century as hemp becomes empire fuel. Ropes for ships, cloth for sails, money for kings. You step off a creaking dock, the salt-scented wind whipping your cloak as massive galleons tower over the harbor. The 17th century is in full swing, and Europe's oceans are lined with ships that stretch toward every horizon. You see men hauling bundles of hemp fibers onto the deck, their hands rough, fingers cut, the smell of raw plant matter mingling with brine and tar. Hemp is no longer just a humble plant. It is the lifeblood of empire. Ropes, sails, rigging, canvas, cords for artillery, it binds nations, literally and figuratively. Every knot tells a story of conquest, trade, and ambition. Hemp cultivation explodes across colonies from the Caribbean to North America. Governors demand fields of the plant for naval supremacy. Farmers are often required by law to grow it. In Virginia, Massachusetts, and the Carolinas, hemp fields stretch in neat rows, their stalks bending with sunlight, while overseers count every bundle. Seeds are pressed for oil, fibers twisted into ropes that will endure storms, battles, and centuries of saltwater decay. Economies swell around this one plant. Taxes, trade, and even paper money are underwritten by hemp. Some say kings literally prosper on its stalks, and that may not be hyperbole. You walk into a colonial warehouse, the scent of dried hemp tickling your nose. Workers, mostly men and boys, strip fibers from the stalks, pound them into ropes, and twist them under the hammer of history. You can feel the pulse of capitalism in each swing of a mallet, each rope coiled and stacked for the next ship. It's labor, it's war, it's commerce, and it's all tied together in green. Yet hemp is not just a utilitarian commodity, it's a subtle cultural force. Sailors on long voyages discover its secondary virtues. In the Caribbean, they chew seeds for nutrition and sometimes mix them with molasses. They notice that inhaling smoke from certain local plants, often cannabis, alters perception, offering brief relief from the endless monotony of ocean life. Stories circulate of mariners claiming visions during storms, as if the smoke aligns them with Poseidon himself. Scholars still debate whether these reports are literal or symbolic, but the recurring theme is clear. Hemp is practical, intoxicating, and intertwined with daily life. Meanwhile, colonies exploit the plant for more than ropes and sails. Its oil is used in lamps to light candleless rooms. In apothecaries, tinctures of hemp seeds are sold for pain, melancholy, and inflammation. In England, the production of rope and sails becomes a matter of national security, and hemp is literally a strategic resource. The Crown mandates strict cultivation quotas, and failure to meet them can lead to fines, or worse. Every bale is accounted for, every field inspected. You realize the plant is entwined with authority itself. The economic importance is staggering. Hemp fibers fuel trade not only within Europe, but across oceans. Ships carrying sugar, tobacco, spices, and silk are held together by the strength of hemp ropes and sails. Without them, naval power would falter. The plant is literally supporting empires, and yet it remains largely invisible in history books, except as material, never as the psychoactive herb revered elsewhere. And yet, colonial life can't resist the human impulse to experiment. In secret, some sailors smoke the resin they've encountered abroad. There are whispered tales of laughing tobacco, an ambiguous substance that relaxes, humors, and inspires. Maybe it's an echo of Eastern traditions, India, Arabia, Africa, transplanted onto the decks of merchant ships. Some officers dismiss it as nonsense, others secretly savor the quiet calm it provides during weeks of monotony at sea. Cannabis is quietly omnipresent, everywhere and nowhere, a companion to empire. Interestingly, the American colonies elevate hemp to civic necessity. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington grow it in large fields, not for smoke, but for rope, paper, and sails. You pass a field near Mount Vernon, stalks sway under the sun, children play at the edges, overseers ensure the yield meets quotas. The future nation's infrastructure is being built on green stems. Yet, amidst all this practicality, there are murmurs in diaries and letters hinting at recreational or medicinal experimentation with cannabis. Scholars still debate whether early Americans recognized its psychoactive potential or mostly ignored it in favor of utility. You walk into a naval dockyard in England, where hemp ropes hang thick like vines in a greenhouse. The sound of hammering, shouting, and the creak of sails fills the air. Every ship relies on this humble plant. Sailors curse it when knots tangle, swear by it when their lines hold fast in storms. The Crown prints official documents ensuring hemp trade, even taxing the plant in certain colonies. Its empire woven from green fibers, taught with authority and labor, yet hiding a secret legacy of sacred and psychoactive use from older civilizations. Meanwhile, the global economy spins. Merchants from Amsterdam, Lisbon, and London deal in hemp along with sugar, spices, and silver. Capital flows like wine, and cannabis, in its many forms, is the silent underpinning. You see the connection: practical needs, empire building, trade networks, human ingenuity, all tied to this single plant. A mainstream historical fact: by the 18th century, hemp is one of the most valuable colonial crops in North America, with its fibers literally sustaining maritime empires. Yet amid all this utility, a strange tension exists. In Europe and the colonies, hemp's intoxicating potential is largely ignored or suppressed. Where India and Arabia revered the plant, Europe treats it as industrial and medication. The green leaves are silent laborers, supporting empires while hiding the whispers of earlier sacred uses. Cannabis is everywhere you look, yet mostly invisible as a companion to human consciousness. As you watch a ship sail into the horizon, ropes taut, sails full, you think about the paradox. Hemp has fueled exploration, conquest, trade, and economics. It has shaped empires, lined the pockets of kings, and held nations together, literally and metaphorically. Yet the smoke, the sacred whispers, the mystical heritage are mostly lost in this chapter of history. And somewhere, in a quiet cabin below deck, a sailor perhaps takes a pinch of resin, inhales, and smiles faintly. Even amid empires and capital, the human impulse to seek a little transcendence survives. You tap your foot to 1930s jazz as weed mingles with music and paranoia becomes its loudest critic. The smoky haze of a dimly lit speakeasy wraps around you like velvet. Your shoes scuff the wooden floor as a saxophone cries out in a slow, sultry blues riff. It's the 1920s, rolling into the early 1930s, and the city pulses with forbidden rhythms. Jazz is king, prohibition is queen, and somewhere between the two, cannabis has found a secret stage. The plant has traveled oceans and centuries to arrive here, in the clatter of piano keys and the sway of flapper skirts. You slip past the bouncer and into a crowd. Men in pinstripes laugh, smoke curling from tiny pipes, eyes glinting behind glasses. Women in beaded dresses tap their heels, tossing heads crowned with feathered headbands. And the scent, that earthy, sharp, intoxicating aroma, drifts from corners where small glass jars are hidden under velvet cloths. Hashish and marijuana have arrived in America and Europe with the jazz musicians, poets, and bohemian intellectuals who saw in the plant a kind of creative lubricant. Cannabis here is not about empire, work, or even ritual. It's about mood, music, and subtle rebellion. A trumpet player lights a joint backstage, inhales, and suddenly every note seems sharper, warmer, more urgent. The audience outside has no idea that the smooth melodies floating across the room are carried not only by brass and drums, but by the quiet inspiration of the green plant. You notice poets nodding, pens scratching feverishly into notebooks, a painter brushing with newfound boldness. Cannabis fuels the avant-garde, the nightlife, the spontaneous brilliance of the era. Yet alongside the creativity, paranoia grows. Newspapers begin publishing lurid tales. Marijuana makes jazz crazy. Righteous youth corrupted by the weed. Horror in Harlem, music, madness, and Mary Jane. A mainstream historical fact emerges. By the 1930s, anti-cannabis sentiment had coalesced in the United States into a moral panic. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics under Harry Anslinger begins framing the plant as a dangerous, corrupting force, often linking its use to African American and Mexican communities in sensationalized reports. Scholars still argue about the motives behind this campaign: racism, fear of social change, or genuine concern for public health, but the result is clear. Cannabis becomes a symbol of moral chaos. You watch a clarinet player in a corner, fingers trembling slightly over keys, puffing on a joint hidden in the folds of his coat. He laughs as a friend tips a chair back dangerously, a laugh fueled by both smoke and music. Outside, posters warn of marijuana's evil influence, yet inside, the smoke moves like liquid creativity. The paradox is palpable. The same plant hailed as a muse by artists is demonized by authorities. Speakeasies and clubs become crucibles of experimentation. Writers, musicians, and actors explore altered states openly, yet always under the threat of police raids or moral condemnation. You see a young poet reciting verses about dreams, love, and cities that never sleep, his words sharpened by the haze of smoke. Nearby, a trumpet player blows a solo that makes your chest ache with longing. The smoke seems to bend the room, carrying the music and laughter alike, momentarily dissolving boundaries between audience and performer, dream and reality. Yet even here, the tension is everywhere. Cannabis is no longer an ancient sacred herb or a colonial crop. It's a social fault line. White-collar reformers, newspapers, and local authorities insist that the plant is dangerous, a direct threat to youth and morality. Stories of crime, insanity, and degradation circulate in the press, often with questionable evidence. You overhear a debate at a corner table. A writer argues that jazz itself, like marijuana, is unfairly vilified. A police officer disagrees, citing the terrifying influence of the plant on music, behavior, and morals. Scholars still debate whether these panics were based on real public health concerns or were largely fueled by fear of cultural change. But the result is clear. Cannabis becomes a symbol of moral chaos. You watch a clarinet player in a corner, fingers trembling slightly over keys, puffing on a joint hidden in the folds of his coat. He laughs as a friend tips a chair back dangerously, a laugh fueled by both smoke and music. Outside, posters warn of marijuana's evil influence, yet inside, the smoke moves like liquid creativity. The paradox is palpable. The same plant hailed as a muse by artists is demonized by authorities. Speakeasies and clubs become crucibles of experimentation. Writers, musicians, and actors explore altered states openly, yet always under the threat of police raids or moral condemnation. You see a young poet reciting verses about dreams, love, and cities that never sleep, his words sharpened by the haze of smoke. Nearby, a trumpet player blows a solo that makes your chest ache with longing. The smoke seems to bend the room, carrying the music and laughter alike, momentarily dissolving boundaries between audience and performer, dream and reality. Yet even here, the tension is everywhere. Cannabis is no longer an ancient sacred herb or a colonial crop. It's a social fault line.
White-collar reformers, newspapers, and local authorities insist that the plant is dangerous, a direct threat to youth and morality. Stories of crime, insanity, and degradation circulate in the press, often with questionable evidence. You overhear a debate at a corner table. A writer argues that jazz itself, like marijuana, is unfairly vilified. A police officer disagrees, citing the terrifying influence of the plant on music, behavior, and morals. Scholars still debate whether these panics were based on real public health concerns or were largely fueled by fear of cultural change. The legal framework begins to catch up with the fear. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 looms just beyond the horizon. Though it's framed as a simple tax measure, it effectively criminalizes cannabis in the United States. Dealers, musicians, and users feel the first real chill of legal scrutiny. Jazz clubs, once free-flowing and vibrant, sense the tightening grip of morality and law. Cannabis becomes simultaneously a badge of sophistication and a crime, a talisman of creativity and a mark of deviance. You drift through the crowd, absorbing the smoky energy. There's something magical in this tension, creation thriving in rebellion, laughter dancing with fear. A mainstream historical fact punctuates the scene. Despite the legal threats and moral panic, cannabis profoundly influences the culture of the era, from music and literature to nightlife and bohemian thought. The plant's subtle power is evident in every improvisation, every whispered story, every poetic line crafted in the glow of cigarette-like joints hidden beneath velvet. Outside, the streets hum with automobiles and distant sirens. Jazz bleeds into alleyways, echoing off brick walls. The smoke lingers, a reminder that art and substance are inseparable. You catch the edge of a conversation about Harlem clubs, about the poets of Greenwich Village, about music festivals hidden from the watchful eyes of morality enforcers. Cannabis in every corner is quietly shaping a generation, even as society begins to call it dangerous, deviant, or deadly. And in this smoky contradiction, you notice a subtle truth. Humans have always flirted with danger to find beauty, with forbidden substances to unlock creativity, and with taboo to taste freedom. The jazz age is a testament to that impulse. Its highs are intoxicating, its fears very real, its history still resonant in the notes that drift across generations. You step outside, the night warm and humid, the hum of streetcars mingling with distant piano chords. You breathe in the city's complex air, jazz, smoke, ambition, and dread. And as the melody fades into the darkness, you realize that the first moral panic over cannabis is just another chapter in a much older, far-reaching story. A story that has traveled centuries, continents, and cultures, whispering in the smoke wherever humans dare to dream.
You watch governments weaponize bedtime stories, reefer madness, to scare a generation into fearing their own relaxation. The flickering glow of a black and white movie theater washes over you as you slip into a 1936 screening of Reefer Madness. The smell of popcorn is faintly sweet, but over it hangs the sharp tang of propaganda, the invisible aroma of fear. You sink into the creaking wooden seat, the screen reflecting an exaggerated world. Teenagers transformed into violent maniacs after a single puff of cannabis. The audience gasps, laughs nervously, and leans forward. This is America's bedtime story, and it's designed to scare its citizens into compliance. You realize you're not just watching a movie, you're witnessing a moral crusade taking shape. Cannabis, once a companion to artists and mystics, is now being framed as the embodiment of evil. Posters in school hallways proclaim its dangers. Lectures in community centers warn of the marijuana menace. Public officials equate weed with crime, madness, and moral decay. Scholars still debate the origins of this hysteria. Was it driven by genuine concern, racial prejudice, or an economic campaign to protect the timber and pharmaceutical industries? Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. Cannabis is demonized. You walk down a city street, passing flappers and young men with slicked back hair, noticing the subtle shifts in society. Jazz clubs, once buzzing with the energy of improvisation and hashish-fueled creativity, now hide their smoke in secret rooms. College students whisper about devil's lettuce as they pass libraries lined with pamphlets warning of its corrupting influence. Even small-town parents begin to fear the nighttime habits of their children. Relaxation itself becomes suspect. Sleep becomes suspect. The simple act of unwinding is now a potential moral failing. In classrooms, teachers hand out pamphlets depicting twisted caricatures of cannabis users. Faces distorted, eyes wild, behavior degenerate. It's a visual shorthand for fear. Yet you notice the odd irony. The film and pamphlets are so over the top, so sensationalized, that many adults can't help but snicker behind their hands. The exaggeration almost admits its own absurdity. But the psychological effect is powerful. Public perception shifts, associating cannabis not with ritual, medicine, or relaxation, but with chaos and corruption. Meanwhile, scientists cautiously study cannabis, often with findings ignored or twisted. A mainstream historical fact. Research in the 1930s indicated potential medicinal uses for cannabis. Yet such evidence was largely overshadowed by sensationalized propaganda. The war on weed becomes a war on perception, fueled by fear, moral panic, and media hysteria. Schools, churches, and newspapers become the front lines of this war. You can almost hear the whispered mantra, "Stay alert, beware the green smoke." You wander into a small pharmacy, noticing jars of cannabis tinctures tucked away behind glass. The pharmacist shakes his head nervously at your interest. "These are only for licensed physicians," he says, voice low. "Don't even think about it otherwise." It strikes you how quickly a substance once common for medicinal and recreational use has been rendered almost invisible by fear and law. Its history is erased, its utility downplayed, its very existence moralized. You pass a group of college students in a dorm hallway, nervously hiding a small pipe. The tension is palpable. The culture of secrecy is growing, fueled by government campaigns and media narratives. Humor, once a companion to cannabis in bohemian circles, becomes a subversive act. Laughter itself is tinged with rebellion, the subtle defiance of those who continue to experiment despite the warnings. The very human desire for leisure and creativity is now criminalized in the minds of the fearful. In classrooms, teachers hand out pamphlets depicting twisted caricatures of cannabis users. Faces distorted, eyes wild, behavior degenerate. It's a visual shorthand for fear. Yet you notice the odd irony. The film and pamphlets are so over the top, so sensationalized, that many adults can't help but snicker behind their hands. The exaggeration almost admits its own absurdity. But the psychological effect is powerful. Public perception shifts, associating cannabis not with ritual, medicine, or relaxation, but with chaos and corruption. Meanwhile, scientists cautiously study cannabis, often with findings ignored or twisted. A mainstream historical fact. Research in the 1930s indicated potential medicinal uses for cannabis. Yet such evidence was largely overshadowed by sensationalized propaganda. The war on weed becomes a war on perception, fueled by fear, moral panic, and media hysteria. Schools, churches, and newspapers become the front lines of this war. You can almost hear the whispered mantra, "Stay alert, beware the green smoke." You wander into a small pharmacy, noticing jars of cannabis tinctures tucked away behind glass. The pharmacist shakes his head nervously at your interest. "These are only for licensed physicians," he says, voice low. "Don't even think about it otherwise." It strikes you how quickly a substance once common for medicinal and recreational use has been rendered almost invisible by fear and law. Its history is erased, its utility downplayed, its very existence moralized. You pass a group of college students in a dorm hallway, nervously hiding a small pipe. The tension is palpable. The culture of secrecy is growing, fueled by government campaigns and media narratives. Humor, once a companion to cannabis and bohemian circles, becomes a subversive act. Laughter itself is tinged with rebellion, the subtle defiance of those who continue to experiment despite the warnings. The very human desire for leisure and creativity is now criminalized in the minds of the fearful. In classrooms, teachers hand out pamphlets depicting twisted caricatures of cannabis users. Faces distorted, eyes wild, behavior degenerate. It's a visual shorthand for fear. Yet you notice the odd irony. The film and pamphlets are so over the top, so sensationalized, that many adults can't help but snicker behind their hands. The exaggeration almost admits its own absurdity. But the psychological effect is powerful. Public perception shifts, associating cannabis not with ritual, medicine, or relaxation, but with chaos and corruption. Meanwhile, scientists cautiously study cannabis, often with findings ignored or twisted. A mainstream historical fact. Research in the 1930s indicated potential medicinal uses for cannabis. Yet such evidence was largely overshadowed by sensationalized propaganda. The war on weed becomes a war on perception, fueled by fear, moral panic, and media hysteria. Schools, churches, and newspapers become the front lines of this war. You can almost hear the whispered mantra, "Stay alert, beware the green smoke." You wander into a small pharmacy, noticing jars of cannabis tinctures tucked away behind glass. The pharmacist shakes his head nervously at your interest. "These are only for licensed physicians," he says, voice low. "Don't even think about it otherwise." It strikes you how quickly a substance once common for medicinal and recreational use has been rendered almost invisible by fear and law. Its history is erased, its utility downplayed, its very existence moralized. You pass a group of college students in a dorm hallway, nervously hiding a small pipe. The tension is palpable. The culture of secrecy is growing, fueled by government campaigns and media narratives. Humor, once a companion to cannabis and bohemian circles, becomes a subversive act. Laughter itself is tinged with rebellion, the subtle defiance of those who continue to experiment despite the warnings. The very human desire for leisure and creativity is now criminalized in the minds of the fearful. In classrooms, teachers hand out pamphlets depicting twisted caricatures of cannabis users. Faces distorted, eyes wild, behavior degenerate. It's a visual shorthand for fear. Yet you notice the odd irony. The film and pamphlets are so over the top, so sensationalized, that many adults can't help but snicker behind their hands. The exaggeration almost admits its own absurdity. But the psychological effect is powerful. Public perception shifts, associating cannabis not with ritual, medicine, or relaxation, but with chaos and corruption. Meanwhile, scientists cautiously study cannabis, often with findings ignored or twisted. A mainstream historical fact. Research in the 1930s indicated potential medicinal uses for cannabis. Yet such evidence was largely overshadowed by sensationalized propaganda. The war on weed becomes a war on perception, fueled by fear, moral panic, and media hysteria. Schools, churches, and newspapers become the front lines of this war. You can almost hear the whispered mantra, "Stay alert, beware the green smoke." You wander into a small pharmacy, notice you breathe the 1960s air thick with rebellion, incense, and a new slogan, "Make love, not laws." The sun is low, a golden haze settling over a sprawling park where young people gather on patchwork blankets, guitars in hand, and smiles in their eyes. You take a deep breath, and the air is rich with the scent of incense, summer grass, and something unmistakably herbal, marijuana, now vibrant, leafy, and alive in a way few in the previous decades could have imagined. It's the 1960s, a world in flux, and cannabis has returned from the shadows of moral panic to claim a central role in the cultural revolution. You wander among tie-dye shirts and long hair, the sounds of electric guitars blending with laughter, and the occasional exhale of smoke. The plant is everywhere, hidden in paper cones, tucked behind flowers, passed from hand to hand with quiet reverence. For the hippies, cannabis isn't just recreation, it's a symbol, a meditation, a protest against the rigid moral and political structures of the past. Each puff is a subtle act of rebellion, a declaration of autonomy in a world still cautious of pleasure. You pass a circle of musicians tuning their instruments. One of them, a young man with wild curls, passes around a joint, and suddenly the music deepens, becoming more expansive, more daring. Notes stretch and bend, rhythms loosen their chains. A mainstream historical fact, by the mid-1960s, marijuana had become emblematic of the counterculture in the United States, intertwined with music festivals, poetry readings, and political activism. The plant fuels creativity, fosters community, and softens the edge of reality, allowing people to imagine new ways of living. In the distance, a poster reads, "Make love, not laws." It's a simple slogan, but it captures a movement. Cannabis is not just about getting high, it's about creating connection, empathy, and a questioning of authority. Young people experiment openly, learning the plant's effects on mind and body, and sharing insights about peace, spirituality, and artistic expression. The hippie ethos transforms the green herb into a cultural touchstone, linking personal liberation with collective hope. You notice debates among the youth, sometimes playful, sometimes intense. One person argues that marijuana opens the mind to spirituality. Another contends that it should be purely recreational. Scholars still argue whether the counterculture truly understood the plant's potential or primarily embraced it as a symbol of resistance. Either way, the combination of music, art, and cannabis creates an atmosphere of expansion, mental, emotional, and social. You stroll past food vendors selling colorful spiced treats and homemade teas. Many of these beverages are infused with cannabis, harking back to ancient traditions like the Indian bang, yet reinvented in the spirit of experimentation. People share recipes, passing knowledge in a casual, communal way. You realize that the culture of sharing cannabis in these decades mirrors ancient practices, an echo of sacred rituals, now secularized but still deeply social. Music festivals like Woodstock in 1969 exemplify this phenomenon. You feel as if you are part of the crowd, the smoke rising in hazy columns above the mass of people swaying to the rhythm of a generation seeking freedom. It's chaotic yet harmonious, anarchic yet unified. Cannabis is woven into the very fabric of the experience, a thread connecting thousands of individuals in a moment of shared consciousness. Yet, the law lingers as a shadow. Police raids, arrests, and negative media coverage remind you that the 1930s propaganda never fully disappeared. Cannabis users still face criminalization, and the government watches closely, sometimes exaggerating risks, sometimes exploiting fear. This tension between personal liberty and societal control fuels the counterculture narrative. To smoke is to claim autonomy. To be free in one's mind is to challenge the old order. You wander into a small commune where young people discuss philosophy, politics, and ecology. Joints pass slowly from hand to hand. Conversations are punctuated with laughter, sighs of relief, and moments of profound insight. Cannabis enhances these interactions, not as a drug of dependency, but as a tool for connection and awareness. You witness discussions about civil rights, war, and environmental stewardship, all illuminated by the relaxed, open-minded atmosphere that cannabis helps foster. A mainstream historical fact nudges your attention. The counterculture's embrace of marijuana catalyzed broader societal conversations about drug policy, personal freedom, and cultural values, laying groundwork for future debates about legalization and medical use. Even as authorities attempted to suppress use, the hippie movement reframed cannabis as a symbol of hope, creativity, and social transformation. As the sun sets, the park glows with firelight and the soft hum of conversation. You see people meditating, sharing poetry, playing music, or simply lying back to watch the stars. Cannabis here is no longer demonized or hidden. It is a quiet ally in the pursuit of exploration, reflection, and communal experience. It embodies the spirit of experimentation, not chaos, freedom, not fear. You inhale deeply, feeling the warmth of the moment, the hope, the creativity, and the collective joy. In this era, cannabis is both a catalyst and a mirror, reflecting the desires of a generation to expand consciousness, challenge old structures, and imagine a world less constrained by fear and repression. And as the night deepens, incense swirling, guitar strings vibrating under nimble fingers, you realize that the 1960s weren't just a time, they were a breathing, living experiment in freedom, creativity, and yes, the quiet, enduring magic of the green plant. You follow the modern transformation, medical legalization, CBD oils, and debates about healing versus highness. The city smells different now. You step into a bustling, sunlit dispensary, the aroma a delicate mix of citrus, pine, and earthy green. It's the 21st century, and cannabis has returned from shadows and smoke-filled paranoia to a new clinical stage. No longer merely a symbol of rebellion, it's now packaged, labeled, and regulated. Bottles of CBD oil line glass shelves next to dried flower jars, tinctures, and capsules. The culture has shifted from hidden rituals and backrooms to carefully curated wellness experiences, yet the echoes of the past, stigma, skepticism, and moral panic still linger. You notice a mother speaking quietly to a clerk about dosing her child for epilepsy. A young man browses for pain relief. An elderly couple seeks help for insomnia. The conversations are different now. They aren't about breaking rules or defying authority. They're about healing. Cannabis is no longer only a recreational herb. It's a medicine, a tool for improving life, for easing suffering. A mainstream historical fact. By the 2010s, several U.S. states and countries worldwide had legalized cannabis for medical use, transforming not only access but also the conversation about human health and the plant's therapeutic potential. Walking through the dispensary, you see evidence of a broader debate: THC versus CBD, high versus relief, recreation versus therapy. Some users prefer psychoactive effects, seeking the old highs and altered consciousness, while others rely on non-intoxicating CBD for chronic pain, anxiety, or inflammation. Scholars still argue about the full potential of cannabis, its long-term effects, and the balance between therapeutic benefit and psychoactive experience. The tension between indulgence and medicine mirrors ancient discussions in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, but now backed by modern research, pharmacology, and clinical trials. Advertising, culture, and even fashion reflect this shift. Cannabis-themed cafes, artisanal edibles, and wellness retreats promote mindfulness, creativity, and relaxation rather than rebellion. You see labels boasting precise concentrations of cannabinoids, instructions for dosing, and advice from certified practitioners. It's a stark contrast to the clandestine dealings of the 1930s and 1960s. The plant, once demonized or hidden, is now framed as a responsible, beneficial companion in modern life. Yet the shadow of the past remains. Media stories sometimes sensationalize the dangers of use, political debates heat up over legalization, and criminal records from minor possession still affect thousands. Cannabis is both celebrated and scrutinized. You overhear a conversation between two scientists, one advocating its therapeutic potential for PTSD, chronic pain, and epilepsy, the other cautioning about misuse and dependency. Scholars still debate where the line should be drawn between medicinal use and recreational indulgence. The dialogue is ongoing, complex, and far from resolved. You walk into a cafe offering cannabis-infused teas and snacks. Patrons sit at small tables, sipping quietly while reading or working on laptops. It's calm, unhurried, a far cry from the paranoia-driven chaos of reefer madness screenings. Here, cannabis is normalized, integrated into daily life as a source of wellness and mindful pleasure. The plant's psychoactive potential is respected, but managed. Its therapeutic benefits are studied, praised, and sometimes contested. Even mainstream culture reflects this transformation. TV shows, documentaries, and literature explore cannabis's history, medical applications, and cultural impact. Festivals celebrate art, music, and wellness, not only hedonistic indulgence. The plant's dual nature, healing and highness, is no longer a simple moral question. It's a nuanced discussion about autonomy, science, and cultural acceptance. Cannabis has become, in a sense, a mirror of modern society, complex, multifaceted, and slowly finding balance between tradition, science, and personal freedom. You pass a medical clinic offering CBD tinctures for anxiety. A researcher explains the endocannabinoid system, detailing how cannabinoids interact with human physiology to relieve pain, stress, and inflammation. It's almost poetic. A plant humans have used for thousands of years is finally understood with scientific rigor, yet its mystical, cultural, and recreational dimensions remain part of the story. Cannabis is not merely medicine, it's a bridge between past and present, ritual and science, rebellion and therapy. Walking home, you notice how subtle the shift has been. Cannabis has journeyed from sacred sadhus to pharaohs' tombs, from jazz clubs to moral panics, from counterculture communes to clinical dispensaries. Its story now includes healing as well as highness, culture as well as commerce. And everywhere you look, on street corners, in wellness magazines, in medical journals, the plant is quietly reclaiming its place in human life, versatile, complex, and enduring. And as night falls, you realize that cannabis today embodies centuries of adaptation. Its dual nature remains, a plant for pleasure, a plant for healing, a plant for contemplation. The debates continue, the research deepens, and society cautiously embraces what humans have known for millennia. Cannabis is more than just a plant. It's a companion in the human journey, flexible enough to survive both stigma and celebration.
You end under a digital aurora, wondering how history will judge humanity's oldest smoke signal, and whether you'd light it again. The sky above shimmers with neon hues, an artificial aurora projected over a cityscape of glass towers and holographic billboards. You inhale, catching the faint, familiar scent of cannabis wafting from a nearby rooftop garden. It's the future, or at least a near future, where technology hums alongside tradition, and the plant that has journeyed across millennia quietly persists in human hands, minds, and rituals. You can almost feel the centuries converge, the sadhus chanting by the Ganges, the pharaohs' tombs lined with herbs, the jazz musicians in smoke-filled speakeasies, the hippie communes singing under open skies, the clinical dispensaries with labeled tinctures and capsules, all layers stacked upon one another like smoke rings in slow ascent. You drift along the skyline, neon reflections dancing across glass surfaces. Street-level advertisements promote wellness apps that track cannabinoid intake. Virtual reality spaces simulate historical experiences with cannabis. And scientists use CRISPR techniques to engineer new strains with precise ratios of THC and CBD. Mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. Cannabis remains one of the most widely used plants worldwide, its applications ranging from industrial hemp fibers to life-altering medical treatments, and even recreational enjoyment, now often regulated yet celebrated in culture and commerce. And yet, you sense the contradictions endure. Governments still debate legalization, moralists argue, and markets profit or speculate depending on the latest policy change. Scholars still argue about its health effects, long-term consequences, and ethical implications. But the plant endures, resilient as ever, a subtle witness to human ambition, creativity, folly, and hope. You imagine historians of the future sifting through archives, asking themselves, how did humans balance the plant's intoxicating allure with its healing promise? And what lessons were learned in the centuries of fear, experimentation, and celebration? Hovering above the city, you watch drones deliver CBD tinctures and artisanal flour to apartment balconies, echoing the discreet exchanges of ancient marketplaces, just updated with technology and efficiency. Cultural attitudes have evolved. Cannabis is increasingly framed as part of a lifestyle, a health supplement, an artistic aid, and yes, still a recreational indulgence. Yet you notice a quiet, almost poetic continuity. The rituals, the shared experiences, the laughter, and the contemplative solitude, all echoes of how humans first approached the plant in the mists of prehistory. The air vibrates with music drifting from nearby rooftop concerts. Some artists experiment with biofeedback-enhanced instruments that respond to relaxation levels induced by cannabis use. You see people reclining in parks, meditating with tinctures, or simply watching digital auroras flicker above. Each experience layered with subtle pleasure, insight, and mindfulness. You can almost hear the whispers of those who came before. The sadhus, the alchemists, the jazz musicians. They would nod quietly in approval. You reflect on the centuries-long journey. Ancient shamans seeking visions, colonial empires building navies on hemp, moral panics shaping public fear, countercultures embracing freedom, and modern medicine finding both therapy and nuance. The plant has endured alongside humanity, adapting, transforming, yet never fully disappearing. Its story mirrors our own, flawed, experimental, beautiful, and constantly evolving. In this quiet observation, you wonder how future generations will judge this era. Will they marvel at the creativity it inspired, the debates it sparked, the healing it enabled? Will they shake their heads at the paranoia, the prohibitions, the fears that shaped centuries of policy and culture? And you find yourself asking, with a gentle smile, whether you'd light it again, whether you'd inhale the legacy of millennia, and become part of this living, breathing story. As the aurora pulses softly above, you lean back and exhale, feeling the calm settle deep in your chest. Humanity and cannabis, intertwined across time, space, and culture, continue to dance in rhythm, sometimes chaotic, sometimes harmonious, always persistent. You hear the faint hum of the city, the soft whisper of the wind, the memory of smoke curling upward through the ages, and you realize that the journey is far from over. The light fades, the hum softens, and for a brief, perfect moment, the world seems to hold its breath. You feel a gentle pull towards sleep, a quiet release, a knowing that the green companion of humanity remains patient and eternal, waiting for the next hand to lift it, the next mind to explore its mysteries.
You settle into the quiet, the city lights dimming behind your eyelids as if the world itself is exhaling. The hum of traffic, distant music, and the faint whisper of wind through leaves blends into a gentle lullaby. You feel the weight of centuries lift softly from your shoulders, leaving only the calm awareness of time stretching like smoke across the ages. Each moment, each breath carries echoes of humans discovering, experimenting with, and learning from a small green plant that has traveled alongside them for millennia. You imagine the sadhus chanting by the Ganges, the pharaohs resting in golden tombs, jazz musicians playing in smoky clubs, hippies sharing laughter in sunlit fields, and patients in modern clinics receiving quiet relief. All of these layers swirl together in the hazy, comforting glow of memory and imagination. You sense the resilience of the plant, and more profoundly, the resilience of humanity. Our curiosity, creativity, and quiet yearning for connection and understanding.
The night wraps around you like a soft blanket. You hear only the gentle rustle of leaves, a distant siren softened by distance, and the whisper of your own breathing. The chaos, the panic, the debate all seem far away now, replaced by a tender awareness of continuity. History, in all its smoky complexity, becomes a companion rather than a lesson, a comforting presence that allows you to drift deeper into reflection and rest. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the stories, the smoke, and the music fade into a warm hum, leaving you with a serene sense of wonder. You smile, softly, letting go, feeling the gentle pulse of centuries beneath your skin, and in the quiet, you settle into a night filled with dreams, curiosity, and the faint, eternal scent of green leaves carried across time. Good night.